Again, we're in Module 5, Novice Problems, and we're looking at problem number 4. This problem is about cluster analysis, and let's do some cluster analysis. I'm going to go to the practice workbook. I'll be skipping probably back and forth between the practice workbooks and the solutions a little bit, but mainly working in the practice books. So here's our problem. Perform a hierarchical, and that's important because this is a type of analysis that we want to do, hierarchical cluster analysis on colleges and universities that are shown below. Here's some specifications. We want 6 clusters to group them into 6 different groups. We want to select the variables for clustering as the median SAT and the acceptance rate. We want hierarchical clustering. We want to normalize our input. We want to use a Euclidean distance algorithm for the purposes of putting these things together. It's a way of figuring out what goes closer to what in terms of a cluster. And we want to do something called average group linkage. So let's look at our data first. These are well-known schools. Amherst, Barnard, Carnegie Mellon, Columbia, Northwestern, Middlebury, Stanford, Smith, Rice, University of Texas, my old alma mater, love that place, Washington and Lee here in Virginia, University of Virginia, and William and Mary. And we have data on these schools, the type of schools that they are, whether they're a university or a liberal arts sort of school. Let's see what William and Mary is considered here. William and Mary is considered a university because it has a little bit broader focus than a place like Wesleyan or Wellesley or even Washington and Lee. We have their median SAT. We have their acceptance rates. We also have information about expenditures, the percentage of top 10 students that they accept, and the graduation rate. Of course, these are all important features. But we've selected median SAT and acceptance rates, which are really kind of quality measures about how the school accepts students and the quality of those students that are accepted. For example, Amherst accepts a very small proportion of students and very highly qualified, 13, 15, and as a median SAT. This is an old SAT, back when I think SATs were based on 1600 or something. Let's see if we can find a school that's got a lower, Harvard's got a lower acceptance rate than they do. It's 15%, very exclusive school, obviously, with a very high median SAT. Even higher than that is or more exclusive is Stanford. They have the same SAT median, and more kids want to try to get in and are rejected. I think Harvard is a larger school than Stanford, by the way. I'm not sure of that. So let's do our analysis and see what this is going to look like. We're going to go to our Excel Miner platform, and you can see in the data analysis where we've been working, there's something called cluster. We're talking about hierarchical clustering. There's also k-means clustering, which is another approach to clustering that leads to similar but sometimes different results because of the difference in the algorithms. Let's hit hierarchical clustering. We get this dialog box, and I'm going to send these guys back as the selected variables. It asks us where our data is. Our data is located here. It asks us whether we have a first row with column headers, and yes, we do. Here are the column headers. And again, the two variables that we want to use for the purposes of analysis are median SAT and acceptance rate. Remember, I pointed to this, hit Control. I move these over into the selected area. This is raw data. I need not do anything more than this. I go to Next. I normalize my data. It's always wise to normalize data. The author talked about why that's the case. Comparing things on different scales sometimes makes for problems, so normalization of data is important. And I'm using Euclidean distance, and the clustering method is group average linkage. There are a bunch of other methodologies that are can be used, but this is one that's used quite often. Let's go to next. It asks me how many clusters do I want, and I want to show my cluster membership. Why? I'm trying to put them into clusters. Why wouldn't I want to show how they're organized? I hit finish, and I get two output sheets. I get one called hierarchical clustering output and hierarchical clustering clusters. Now, a technician would look at this and make some decisions about whether this is a good cluster analysis or not. We're going to dispense with this sheet, and we're going to look at the hierarchical clusters, and we're going to see that what we've got here are the clusters now for the schools that we had, still in the order that they appeared before. So if I take a copy of our schools, let me take the names of our schools here. I copy these, and I go back to the hierarchical cluster output. Or hierarchical clusters, and I'm going to put it here. These are the schools. These are the clusters that they pertain to. Amherst is in cluster 1, so it's Bowdoin, Brown, Columbia, Cornell, Duke, Georgetown, and these schools have some similarities, as you can see. One way to look at the clusters, I mean, it's hard to look at the clusters when the numbers are spread out like this, is to go ahead and to perform a sort. I'm going to increase the size of this so we can see what we're doing. Let's sort this data. So I go to Home, I go to Sort, Custom Sort, and I want to sort by cluster ID. Hit OK. And here are our clusters now. Here's cluster number 1. I'm going to color these guys. Cluster number 2, I'll leave that color. Cluster number 3, I will color. Need to pull it down one more. There we go. Cluster 4, cluster 5, and cluster 6. So let's look at some of these clusters and see what we find. You know, a lot of these schools have very similar sort of attractiveness to students. Amherst, Bowdoin, Brown. These are all on the East Coast. We weren't using their geographic location as a way of clustering, but it kind of falls out naturally. Of course, Rice is in Texas, and Pomona is in California. So these are schools with pretty high SATs and exclusive acceptance rates. You don't see any state schools there. In the next bunch, it's a much larger cluster. You see some of these private schools: Barnard, Bryn Mawr, Carnegie Mellon, Mount Holyoke, Oberlin, Occidental, Smith. Then you see some state schools: University of Michigan, Rochester, University of Texas. I'm not sure University of Rochester is a state school, but University of Virginia, and William and Mary. And these are schools also that have pretty good SAT scores and are relatively exclusive. But a place like William and Mary, it has a mandate from the state to take state students, and there are a lot of outside students outside of the state of Virginia that would love to come to William and Mary that may not get that opportunity because of our obligation as a state to service our population. The next group are also very good schools, relatively exclusive. There's Washington and Lee, by the way, University of Chicago, University of Pennsylvania, Davidson College, a very nice college. Let's look at this cluster number 4. This is one of our questions. Well, why do you think this group clusters? They have slightly lower SAT, median SATs. Why? These are large state institutions, and they have an obligation to the state. They're pretty exclusive. There's still a lot of people that want to go to UNC. The SAT, the median SAT is down a little bit simply because of that state mandate. And then you see some clusters that are uh, schools very similar, Caltech and MIT. You can't find two schools that are more similar than that. Astronomical SAT scores, just a bunch of digit heads who go to school there, and pretty low admission score. Most kids don't pick Caltech as a backup, as a stretch school. They know that the people that are applying at Caltech probably belong at Caltech. And then finally, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, and Stanford. These are very high score institutions and very exclusive. So you can see how that breaks down. We could have used other characteristics for the purposes of creating our cluster. We might have used median SAT and then expenditure of the student. It kind of creates a value proposition, with in terms of what students pay versus the kind of the entry fee, the SAT score. Look at the cost of Caltech, $102,000 per year. Of course, nobody pays that. Everybody's on scholarship there, but it's a very high cost because of all the technical stuff that they do there. All right, that's cluster analysis. Let's see if we have some questions to answer here. We connected the schools. What do you think about the memberships? Well, conversations about, they seem to make some sense. You might wonder why one might be in one cluster versus another cluster. We looked at cluster number 4. They have 3 members. Those are the 3 very large state institutions that everybody wants to get into. A lot of people want to go to Berkeley. A lot of people want to go to UNC. And a lot of people certainly want to go to UVA. So that rounds up our analysis here. And what I would expect in this discussion is, some verbiage relating to how you feel about those clusters being created, and whether there seems to be a match in the schools along those lines. All right, that's the end of our discussion of Problem 4 in Module 5.